Buenos dias. So we've broken down the sermon or the talks today into three different parts. So I'm going to start with justice and kind of what it meant to me and with our trip to El Salvador. I struggled with kind of how to connect justice to our trip. So as I was writing this on Saturday afternoon, a little procrastination, with my message for El Salvador, I thought the best person that encapsulates justice in the country of El Salvador is Oscar Romero, and really worldwide. This should be somewhat of a familiar name for a lot of you. He's definitely been mentioned in sermons here before in this church. So one of my favorite Oscar Romero quotes is that we may give our body and our blood over to suffering and pain, like Christ, not for self, but to give harvests of peace and justice to our people. Oscar Romero was an archbishop in El Salvador during the Civil War, during the 70s and the 80s. He was seen as a social conservative when he was first appointed. After following the death of his close friend, priest Rutilio Grande, he became an outspoken critic of the military government of El Salvador. Romero was a champion of social justice in El Salvador. His message has been spread throughout Central America as well as the world. Romero was not interested in liberation theology, but faithfully adhered to Catholic teachings on liberation and a preferential option for the poor, desiring a social revolution based on interior reform. If I had had the pleasure to sit down with Mr. Romero over some pupusas and some fine coffee, we would probably disagree on a lot of some social issues. But at the end of the day, we would see enough need for social justice and enough warmth in our hearts to find enough common ground that we'd have mutual respect. He brought to the country of El Salvador, the most needed time, a message of peace and justice. During a time of complete chaos, of civil war that has splintered that country to the core and that still leaves that country reeling from the effects. When you travel to El Salvador, you fly into Oscar Romero International Airport. He is literally the first beacon of light that you see when arriving into the country. When you travel with ESNA, the story of Oscar Romero continues on. And you cannot mention the history of El Salvador, especially more modern history of El Salvador, without mentioning the great Oscar Romero. On the topic of justice, Romero actively denounced violations of human rights of the most vulnerable people and defended the principles of protecting lives and promoting human dignity and opposing all forms of violence. Oscar Romero was a martyr. In his first visit to El Salvador in 1983, Pope John Paul II prayed at Romero's tomb, despite opposition from the government and also despite opposition within the church. They strongly opposed the liberation theology, and the Pope later praised Romero as a zealous and venerated pastor who tried to stop violence at every turn. John Paul II asked for a dialogue between the government and the opposition to end the civil war in El Salvador. So, switching back a few years, on March 24th, 1980, Oscar Romero delivered what would be his last sermon. He called on Salvadoran soldiers as Christians to obey God's higher order to stop carrying out the government's repression and violations of basic human rights. At the night mass at a small hospital, De la Divina Providencia, or Divine Providence Hospital, a church-run hospital specializing in oncology, Romero had just finished his sermon, just as a red automobile came. And I believe there's actually the quote, his very last quote that he said in your bulletin today, if you want to look that up later. It's fantastic. So Romero finished his sermon, and the red automobile came to a stop. In front of the church, it said he knew his fate that day. He spotted the murder squad and accepted and looked his persecutors in the eye. He knew the fate that was given to him that night, and he accepted it. He was gunned down. To this day, nobody has ever been charged or prosecuted with the crime. There's strong speculations of who did it, and it was definitely people that opposed his peaceful justice message. So I'm going to end my portion of this talk today with another Oscar quote that will hopefully lend hope for a better El Salvador with all of our help in the future. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and do the rest. So the lucky few of us, they weren't all here today, they got to be the face for a lot of your generosity, your prayers, your thoughts, and the support for those abroad. The amazing people would love nothing more than to see more faces to thank in person with hugs and compassion. We cannot do everything, but what we can do something, and it might be a step along the way. Thank you.
The work of our hands in Las Trincheras was only part of our purpose there. The work of our hearts was so much more the point. Nevertheless, while I was helping with the building of Carlos and Sonia's new house, I was carrying a large sheet of corrugated metal to the side where others would mount it on the wooden structure. They were not heavy, but awkward, and a corner of the metal nicked my leg. When I glanced down, I could see that it was starting to bleed. It was just a scratch. I was tempted to just ignore it, but then I decided I really should clean it and put some antibiotic on it. I notified one of the group leaders, Alvaro. He instantly took charge, urgently walking me back to the church, which was the center of our operations. Once there, Isaac, our driver, showed up with a first aid kit. I was put in a chair with my leg elevated, and several would-be nurses gathered around. Then, with many squirts of hand sanitizer and eventually a triple antibiotic, my wound was cleansed. Finally, a Band-Aid was lovingly applied. All better. I stood with a smile and thanked Alvaro for his love and mercy. But given my preoccupation with learning Spanish words, I then asked him how to say it in Spanish. He replied, "Gracias por su amor y piedad." That's how it goes with the heart's work. You start out to show mercy to others, and it comes back to you in equal measure. For me, this was the most profound and meaningful part of our mission trip. At one point in my life, the word mercy meant someone with privilege sparing someone with less power from suffering. It meant taking pity on someone. That was the word Alvaro used, piedad. Our scriptural text, however, uses the word misericordia for mercy. Some biblical translations use the word kindness, which makes me think of compassion. But whether we say piedad, misericordia, o compasión, it describes the work of the heart that God requires of us. On the first full day in country, we visited several sites in the capital city of San Salvador. It was bright, sunny morning as we stood on the plaza in front of La Catedral Metropolitana, where Monseñor Oscar Romero was buried after being assassinated. Alvaro quietly described to me his experiences on that day. He was only 14, attending the public wake with his grandmother. They were among over 100,000 mourners crowding the plaza outside the cathedral. Suddenly, shots were fired into the crowd. Military snipers positioned in buildings around the plaza were killing people, and bombs were exploding on nearby streets. People screamed and ran for their lives. Some found sanctuary and safety in the cathedral. Alvaro and his grandmother desperately fled down one of the streets, running until they could find a bus that would take them back to their own neighborhood. I was horrified by the trauma he had experienced, but Alvaro assured me that he had healed from the trauma and that today he visits the plaza with a sense of honor and gratitude. This was just the first of many stories I was to hear about the tragic impact of the 12-year Civil War and of the strength and resilience of the Salvadoran people. I learned that the community of Las Trincheras, which literally means the trenches, was founded by families fleeing the war. They had to leave everything behind and start over with nothing except their determination. It soon became clear to me that even 30 years later, these courageous people are still struggling to overcome this legacy and rebuild their lives. Despite their poverty, they are grateful and optimistic. They are working together to embrace every opportunity to move forward into a promising future. The more I came to know the people of Las Trincheras and experienced their gracious friendship, the more I felt humbled and ashamed. Here I was, a privileged citizen from the United States, coming to, quote, help them improve their lives. I represented the country that during the war had supported the oppressive military government. Now I was taking pity on them. I carried on with this discomfort for several days, but through conversation and shared experience, I was eventually reassured. Never did I feel judged or resented. I did not feel as if I was being held responsible for the ways my government had contributed to their suffering. I only felt their kindness, their loving embrace. They were showing me mercy. Together, in mutual understanding and friendship, we had become partners working together shoulder to shoulder to improve not only their lives, but all our lives. Oscar Romero once said, "There are many things that can only be seen through the eyes that have cried." The mercy I could show the people of Las Trincheras was to cry through their eyes. This is the work of the heart that God requires. But it doesn't seem like a requirement to me. It seems like a gift, one that I will return to Las Trincheras to claim again.
I always dreamed of being a missionary as a kid. I pictured myself in a little dirndl skirt, sitting in the middle of Africa with a grass-covered hut roof on stilts and teaching a bunch of little children how to read. Well, obviously, my life didn't turn out that way. The way I pictured it when I was 10. I married and worked at a different, complete profession and raised a couple of great kids. In my 50s, an old friend of mine, Janie White, told me enthusiastically about her trip to El Salvador, which she learned about from a member of her church. It sounded interesting, and the following year, I had a little school supply drive at my church to help them fill the suitcases that they took down there. In those days, if you traveled to any other country, you were allowed 2 50-pound suitcases each to carry free, and so that's what we did. And then the next year, she invited me to go along. It took me a while to decide whether I wanted to or not, but in the end, I decided that that would be something I could do. It changed my life. And I think it has changed the lives of all the other people who got to go too. But I think what changes your life is to see the way the people live there, but mostly how much they enjoy us, welcome us, and thank us for the little ways we make their life better. Saint Romero, yes, he has been beatified, said, and this was what John said, but I can't help it, I have to say it again. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, and an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and do the rest. El Salvador was put before me. So that is where I become a missionary for 2 weeks, not for a lifetime, but 2 weeks. God's grace will do what I can't. Whenever I reflect on my numerous trips to El Salvador, there's always this huge disparity in the way I live and the way the peasants in Las Trincheras live, which humbles me. Take breakfast, for example. Every morning I get up and make coffee first. I usually buy it from Costco and pour the grounds in a little paper filter, put it in the machine, touch a button, and it's ready in 5 minutes for a whole pot that Greg and I can share. If I want eggs, there's always some available in a carton in the refrigerator, and I can cook them in 5 minutes. With a slice of toast from that sliced bread in the plastic bag, I slide that bread into my toaster and it will be done at the same time as the coffee and the eggs. Maybe I'd rather have cereal. Both hot and cold varieties are within my arm's reach in my kitchen, and I can cook oatmeal in the micro in 3 minutes and pour a bowl of granola in 30 seconds. My life is convenient and easy. Contrast that with my friend Claudia in Las Trincheras. When she wakes up in the morning, there is no coffee. Even though it grows nearby, the crop is just too valuable for them to drink themselves. So she has a cup of water scooped from a barrel next to her where she cooks. Last night, she saved a cup of beans left over from dinner and enough masa to make 3 tortillas, one for her, one for her husband, and one for their daughter. The fire is gone out and her stove is cold, so she walks up a trail to her mother's house and gathers in her arms enough firewood that she can carry to warm the beans and cook the 3 tortillas. Claudia doesn't have chickens, so there are no eggs. Her storage bin for corn and beans is nearly empty, and there is more than a month to go till harvest. She grows squash in her yard, and they have a banana tree and a mango tree, so that's what the family eats when they ripen. Her daughter has 1 school uniform, and Claudia washed out a spot on the white blouse yesterday where her daughter spilled something. Because it rained last night, that uniform blouse is still damp, but the little girl has to wear it to school anyway. That little girl washes up in the little basin in the sink, and Claudia sets about combing her long hair and plaiting it into an intricate and beautiful braid so she can be proud of herself for looking her best at school. After the same breakfast she has had every day of her life, the little one goes off to school, and Claudia starts her own day's work. She adds more wood to the fire and starts boiling the scoop of dried corn that she takes from the bin. After that softens enough, she will take it down to the mill, and for a nickel, they will grind enough of that softened corn to make the masa for the family's other 2 meals that day. The beans need to soak and boil for about 4 hours, so she gathers the firewood for that. Claudia will tend her squash plants, take a palm branch and sweep out her mud-floored house and around the yard of it. The outhouse is smelly, but that's just a fact of life. She uses it and gets it over with. Sometimes, if she has time, she walks her little one to school and gets to visit with the mothers who have done the same. That is one of the high points of her day. But when the chilitos, or white-skinned people, are there, it is party time in Las Trincheras. Claudia has volunteered to help with the lunches that they serve us every day, and they learn to wash and sanitize their hands because the chilitas have very tender stomachs, and we can't endure their germs. She scrubs vegetables so they can be cooked for us. She wraps silverware in napkins, peels cantaloupe, and maybe even a fresh pineapple. There is hope that maybe she will receive a small tip at the end of her 2 weeks of cooking for us, and maybe then she could buy some rice to go with those tortillas and beans. There hasn't been any for a month or 2, and some cooking oil and a bar of laundry soap. She will proudly introduce me or reintroduce me to her daughter and remind me of her name and show off her elaborate braid. A few years back, we visited Claudia's home, and she had flowers growing in makeshift pots around the house, maybe in an old tire or half of a soccer ball sliced. The beds were made as neatly as you can make a rope bed, which is just string threaded on wood to keep them up off of the mud floor. At the time she had us over, she was hoping we could build her a house, like the one that we built this year for Sonia and her family. She's on the list, but her name hasn't come up yet. This year, she timidly asked me if I could possibly get her a sink. There they call them pilas. She has always only had little round plastic dish pans and a barrel to dip in them for water. She wanted a deep cement sink that has like a built-in countertop. And that will serve as the family bath, the kitchen sink, and the laundry room. I used some of the donations I received from family and friends and bought her that $50 sink. I was happier than she was when I learned they could deliver it the next day. What humbles me is that Claudia is doing her best under her circumstances. She always has a smile on her face. She is proud of her daughter, and I am proud of my children. And she would do anything to help that little girl. We are alike, way more than we're different. Do we speak the same language? Do we have the same skin color? Do we have the same circumstances? The answer to all those questions is no. But we are sisters walking humbly with God and doing our best with what we have. There are many reasons to hope that I have seen since we have been there over the years. In the 11 years that I have gone, we have built almost 20 houses. That means 20 families now have a cement floor where the parasites can't live. The children will be clean and safe. And they have a sink or a pila and an ecological stove that doesn't take near as much firewood. They have beds with mattresses now. The Early Childhood Center has been built, which has given 40 little preschoolers a good start on their education. There was a water project sponsored mostly by the Rotary clubs in the United States, and most of the people now have water running right in front of their houses, and it only flows maybe to their house 3 days a week, but they can store it, and they don't have to walk quite so far for it. And that water comes from a source deep down in the volcanic ground, which makes it more pure. And there is a whole new wing built onto the school. One of the classrooms is a computer room with a row of computers for those in the upper grades to use. There are 2 new classrooms for the primary kids with their own little bathroom in between. And he won't tell you this, so I will. One of those classrooms is dedicated to John Sherry. Our son, who helped raise the funds. It took him 2 years. We are obviously proud of him for that. And this year, I am excited to say we saw the graduation of the technical school, where about 20 young mothers have learned the skill of sandal making. They found a buyer for their sandals, and ESNA, which is our organization, has fronted them the money for a few sewing machines and both pedal and electrical, and the supplies that they will need to get started in their little business. They will be able to work right in their town. They have leased a building near the church, which John had the privilege of painting a mural on this year for starting this endeavor. Our new dream is to make the necessary improvements to the wiring of the building so that they can have plenty of light and power to make the sandals. And my hope lies with those women who will now use their profits to benefit their children. Who knows what the next generation will bring to the town and the country and the world. One of the reasons I return to El Salvador year after year is because I always receive more than I give. And I get to be the hands and feet of all the people who have given their money. There is a saying in Spanish that the Salvadorans often use, Dios se lo pague. This means God will pay you. When I walked up to the hill of the house on the last day when we were going to dedicate the home to Sonia and her family, I saw Sonia standing outside her house, just looking at the 2 new windows she had. Not windows that open and close with glass and screens like we have, but windows with no glass, but just a little hinge and a door, so they can close them against the storms, but open them on the beautiful day time when we were there and let the sunshine in, get some circulation, air it out. I don't speak a lot of Spanish, but she was so happy I could see it in her face. A dream for her was realized. I understood the words of, "Look at my window." She had a clean, dry, safe place to sleep with her big family, enough beds with sheets on them for everyone. She cried with gratitude when she thanked us after her formal presentation, and she said, "Dios se lo pague." He already has. Amen.